Welcome to Culture and History. Every culture has a story, and every story shapes our culture. I'm your host, K&H, and this space is about truth, reflection, and rediscovery. Here we dive deep beneath the surface of what we've been told, exploring the stories that formed humanity's consciousness from ancient to the modern world. So let's open the scroll and begin this journey.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today's deep dive is into something pretty foundational. We're looking at history, but, well, how our source material redefines it as his story.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just, looking back at dates on a calendar. It's really about exploring how these core narratives, these his stories, actually build, the architecture of how we think, our consciousness.
Absolutely. And our mission today, it's kind of a complex, actually. We're using the sources to really understand how these fundamental stories actively shape culture now, modern consciousness.
Right.
And we need to look at the power that comes from, reclaiming them, using these narratives to find identity and maybe truth, even unity.
And for you listening in, the value here is pretty big, I think. You're essentially getting a shortcut to understanding the foundational stories, the kind of hidden code that's underpinning so much of modern thought.
You're sometimes restricting it.
Or restricting it, exactly. We're aiming to get beyond just the surface events and look at the energy behind them. So let's start right there. The central definition.
Why?
Why his story? What are the sources getting at when they say this is deeper than just like a sequence of events?
It's a really important distinction they make. Philosophically, the sources define his story not as, just one man's account.
Not just his story.
Exactly. It's defined very precisely as the encoded memory of a people, of a consciousness. It's like the spiritual and cultural data set for a whole group's existence.
Okay, encoded memory. That makes it sound vulnerable, doesn't it? If memory can be encoded, it can be altered. Or maybe deliberately hidden.
That's the crucial point, that vulnerability. Because culture itself is described here as the living result of all these accumulated stories, these traditions, these foundational myths.
So if the story is the blueprint, maybe, then the culture is the building that grows from it.
That's a great analogy, yeah. And if that blueprint gets corrupted or bits get erased,
then the building is warped, distorted.
Exactly. The outcome reflects the changes in the code.
And that brings us straight to this core issue the material raises, doesn't it? The power dynamic. Who owns the narrative? Are people defining themselves, or are they being defined by, someone else?
Which is why that ancient proverb they highlight is so central to this whole philosophy. It just cuts right through the noise,
The one about the lion.
Yeah. Until the lion learns to write, every story will glorify the hunter.
Oof. Yeah. That forces you, really, to question every story you think you know, every foundation.
Who held the pen? Whose perspective are we inheriting?
If the lion is only described by the hunter, then its story is defined from the outside. It's not its own authentic nature being expressed.
And this, according to the sources, is how you get cultural amnesia, where people perform rituals or hold beliefs.
But they've forgotten the original why. The sacred context is gone.
Precisely. So the goal of this kind of analysis is to start spotting those external narratives so we can begin maybe reclaiming that narrative sovereignty.
Okay, but here's a question. If it's encoded memory, how do we make sure we're not just swapping one bias for another? Doesn't memory itself carry distortions right from the start, from the moment it was encoded?
That's a subtle but really important point the sources tackle. The distinction they draw isn't just memory versus, say, objective fact. It's memory versus the source, with a capital S.
The source, meaning?
The idea is that before the encoding, before the story started being written down or passed on in specific ways, there was a kind of foundational unified truth, a source. The memories we have now are like fragmented reflections of that original unity.
Okay. So reclaiming the story isn't about blindly defending every cultural quirk or bias that got encoded along the way.
No, it's about trying to align the current memory, the current story, back towards the fundamental unity of that original code, getting closer to the source. And what's fascinating here is when you start tracing this encoded memory, this foundational knowledge and sense of order, as it actually travels across geography, across time, how it transforms.
Right. This is like the conceptual relay race. The sources lay out a pretty specific lineage, don't they? Where does this story of meaning start getting encoded?
They trace a clear line. It starts, they say, in the ancient world of the East. This foundational wisdom then flowed into Kemet, That's ancient Egypt.
And Kemet was significant because...
Because it seems to have acted as this massive repository, organizing this inherited knowledge, representing it symbolically in these incredibly profound metaphysical structures, hieroglyphs, temples, myths.
Okay, so Kemet holds and organizes it. What happens when that knowledge moves out of those symbolic structures, say, into the early Semitic world?
That shift into the Phoenician Hebrew context is seen as crucial, because here, that knowledge, which was held in these dense symbols, these hieroglyphs, it starts getting translated into linguistic narrative forms.
From pictures to words, essentially.
Yeah. In a way, yes. Those deep, multi-layered symbolic meanings start getting, well, solidified into more linear chronological texts. And then this knowledge keeps traveling through Babylon, through Persia, often getting adapted, maybe filtered, to fit the political systems or the hierarchies of those empires.
Okay, so that's the foundation spreading. But the sources seem to say the really big shift, one that kind of changed the nature of the story, happened when it hit the Mediterranean, Greece and Rome.
Precisely. That's where the sources pinpoint two really critical transformations, points where the way humans related to this foundational knowledge fundamentally changed.
Okay, let's take the first one, language. Translation. The sources talk about the power of just moving sacred ideas from one tongue to another. What's the cost, they say?
They really emphasize this. Translating sacred symbols into new languages, it actually alters consciousness, because the original Slavic language wasn't just descriptive, it was often seen as generative, vibrational, alive. So when you transfer that into a different language structure, like from, say, an ideographic language with symbols holding whole concepts to an alphabetic one, the meaning often shifts. It goes from being symbolic, multi-layered, kind of intuitive, to something more singular, more linear, more literal.
So depth gets lost in translation.
Dramatically diminish, they argue. The encoded memory gets flattened out.
Like taking a hologram and trying to represent it as a 2D picture.
That's a perfect way to put it. That simplification, that flattening, it sets the stage for the second major transformation. Rationalization.
Right. This is where Western thought really kicks in. Greek philosophy, Roman law, and structure. But hang on, wasn't rationalization important for establishing order, science, stable societies? Was this shift all bad?
Well, the sources don't necessarily frame it as bad, but they highlight the cost. Rationalization definitely created structures we still rely on, but the cost was sidelining the metaphysical wisdom. The Greek-Roman approach tended to prioritize logic, structure, analysis, over that more holistic, intuitive way of knowing. It basically took the sacred, the intangible, and tried to systematize it, analyze it, break it down.
So this ancient knowledge, which maybe was accessed through intuition or symbols or direct experience, it got subjected to purely analytical tools.
Exactly. It got fragmented into specialized subjects. You start seeing this split between mind and spirit conceptually.
And that rationalizing impulse, that way of thinking, it profoundly shaped the Western world, didn't it? Modernity.
Absolutely. It shifted the worldview from one grounded in a kind of collective sacred mystery to one centered more on the individual rational dissecting mind. The consciousness changes from knowing through something, through experience, to knowing about something, through analysis and organization.
Which brings up that crucial question again. If the story shapes the culture, and the story itself got rationalized, fragmented, what are the real-world consequences we see today? From that, let's call it fractured cultural DNA.
Oh, they're huge.
You think about even modern political discourse, maybe. Are we constantly just translating deep symbols into literal talking points and missing the bigger picture?
That's exactly the kind of thing the sources point to. This modern fragmentation, cynicism, this inability to find common ground on deeper concepts, they see it as a direct result of this historical rationalization process. If the hunters rationalized the lion's story,
they left us with scattered pieces, not the whole lion.
Precisely. Just the parts they could measure and categorize.
Okay, that image of a fractured consciousness, this societal fragmentation, that actually leads us perfectly into the next part. The solution, maybe? If the historical journey broke the code, how do we fix it? The sources talk about culture healing.
Yes, and what's really crucial here, I think, is how culture healing is defined. It's beautifully simple in a way. It's not about inventing some new ideology, political or spiritual.
Not building something new from scratch.
No. It's defined simply as remembering what was forgotten. It means trying to restore the original unified code by recovering the lost context of our own narrative.
That's a profound shift, isn't it? From creating something new to recovering something old, or maybe timeless.
It is. It's about restoring the original code, the generative code. And that allows for what the sources call true narrative sovereignty.
Narrative sovereignty, meaning?
Meaning reclaiming your foundational story as your identity, as something deep, core, non-negotiable, rather than just treating it like a surface-level cultural trend or an ideology you can pick up and drop.
Identity versus ideology. Big difference.
Huge. And the philosophy here asserts that it's only by rediscovering this ancient unified knowledge that we can even begin to heal the deep psychological splits, the social fragmentation that we see all around us today.
And this all seems to tie into this core concept they introduce, cultural DNA. Now, that has to be more than just a catchy metaphor for history, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's presented as the deepest layer of this whole framework. The sources literally define cultural DNA as the collective heartbeat of humanity. It's this powerful idea. Just like our genetic DNA encodes biological traits, our stories, our languages, our symbols, our shared memories, these things encode the very essence of humanity's collective consciousness.
Okay, so the traditions we keep, the languages we speak, even the symbols that provoke a reaction in us, they aren't just old habits or artifacts.
No, they're the living strands of information, the code of our collective self. And like any code, it can get fragmented or corrupted.
They are the operating system.
That's it. This cultural DNA represents a shared field of knowing. It grounds ancestral thought. It establishes this collective consciousness that exists beyond any single individual's lifespan.
So we look at modern problems, feeling disconnected, chasing fleeting trends or ideologies.
Yeah.
The sources would say these are symptoms.
Symptoms of fragmented cultural DNA, exactly, of being cut off from that deeper shared field.
So if the DNA is misaligned, maybe because of that historical rationalization we talked about, then the healing process, this culture healing, has to involve relinking, recontextualizing our lives today.
Yes. And the ultimate goal, as the material outlines it, is aligning back to its source, capital S again.
Back to that original unity.
Right. Which suggests that cultural evolution, it isn't just a straight line forward, not just linear progress. It's cyclical. Real progression involves this constant return to unity. Always tracing the story back, finding the original source before the fragmentation set in.
Because the belief is that the deepest identity is unity.
That seems to be the core assertion, that underneath all the fragmented stories, the source code is one of unity.
So if we, as individuals or communities, can start identifying the specific strands of our own story that feel corrupted, or maybe just rationalized down to almost nothing.
Like the hunter's version of the story.
Exactly. Then we move from just passively consuming history to actively engaging in cultural recovery. It makes it personal, actionable for you, the listener. #outro.
So this deep dive really makes it clear, I think. Every story we live by, every foundational narrative we absorb, it's not just static history filed away somewhere.
No, it's alive. It's energy. It's vibration. It's living memory. And the key takeaway, maybe, for you listening, is that what we choose to remember, what we choose to reclaim through this idea of narrative sovereignty, that fundamentally shapes who we become collectively.
We started with that really powerful challenge, didn't we? Until the lion learns to write, every story will glorify the hunter. This work, this process of culture healing, of trying to align the cultural DNA, it's like the lion finally picking up the pen.
Not to erase the hunter's story, necessarily.
No, but to restore its own story, its own connection back to that unified source.
So thinking about that, since our stories are these strands of our cultural DNA, this living code, and every tradition, every rhythm, every word carries the memory of who we are, here's a final thought to maybe take away. What specific piece of your own cultural story, or maybe even your personal story, perhaps one that feels a bit fragmented or flattened out, rationalized, what piece will you reflect on today to start maybe, just maybe, aligning back towards the source?
In the end, every story is more than history. It's energy, vibration, and memory. What we remember determines who we become. This is Culture and History, his story. Join me next time as we trace the journey of culture and history of humanity. Until then, reflect on your story, because humanity's culture depends on it. Also, don't forget to let your light shine and share the love. Subscribe, comment, and like.